Hello, Assalamu alaikum. Welcome back, friends, with the second session. We're really excited to have Maryam Houbakht, who's an experienced user experience designer, visual communicator. She has over a decade of experience in Middle East, and she's a MBA from Halt International Business School. Thank you very much for joining us, Maryam. And we're here for this session on human-centric design, and we have Major General Vedmin Zikia, Vice Chancellor Law Garrison University, with us. So thank you very much for joining us. Thank you, Mariam, and over to you, please.
Thank you so much, Imran. Hello, everyone. It's nice to be connected, even though it's virtually. But I would like to thank Imran for the nice introduction. Um, I had a nice chat earlier with Imran. It's a very nice experience for me to present this presentation, which is one of my favorite subjects, to the talent that's out there for Pakistan, which is one of the countries. I'm very one of my neighbors. I'm from Iran, and it's one of my neighbors, and it's a place I would love to visit one day. I was just having a chat earlier with Imran. I was saying how jealous I am that you have rain forecasted for this weekend. And then he told me that it won't be the first one this summer, so that got me even more jealous. So lucky you. Please go ahead and enjoy it. And without wasting any more time, we're just going to get started with the presentation. I'll just give you a little bit more brief about myself before starting on the topic. And thank you for Emran for taking the initiative of running us through the presentation. I'm just going to ask him to just move us through the slides as we keep on going along. So just a little brief about myself. My name is Maryam. I come from the background of visual arts and graphic design, and lately my focus has been on experience as well as interaction design, which is more generally known as UI and UX. Within UAE and the region, the past couple of years, I've been more focused to help multinational companies, such as companies in the Big Four, as well as some other medium-sized firms, to help the design aspect of the digital transformation of some very large scale down to medium scale projects within the Middle East region. As Imran mentioned, again, I'm an EMBA graduate from Halt Business School, which is where I got to know Imran as well. I also consider myself a storyteller, but the most area which I come as an expertise is discovering and getting to know the users in depth. And so now I'm just going to run you through exactly what the agenda of the presentation is. That will be the next slide. So first of all, we're just going to have a definition of the human-centered design, and then I'm going to take you into the details of the concept, which are the three main phases of HCD. And then towards the end, we'll leave the floor open for a nice chat and discussion around the topic. So moving on to the next slide, we are going to start with the definition of human-centered design, and we're going to see what human-centered design is. It's a newly rising concept of people to actually figure out what the workability behind a certain idea or a project is by not just having a user as a passive observer. It's actually getting them actively involved in the entire project, and this will allow you to have a much better understanding in depth of the entire concept, and it will be able to you'll be able to gather a lot more knowledge this way. So let's go to the next slide. And is HCD in human-centered design important? Yes, it is important because it's based on empathy. So what happens is you go out there, you see how people actually interact with the real life. You see how people are actually responding emotionally. You get to ask them the type of questions that you want, get to see what expectations you have, and through all of this, this actually puts your mindset in a different perspective, and it encourages you to think differently. That's the significance of HCD. But moving on to the next slide, which is who and what level of society in fact uses the methodology. You can say pretty much it's used at almost every level. So you have people at the government sector, so entities like Economic Development Department of the UAE of Dubai is using it to help initiatives of medium to small size businesses get set up and get to operate within the economy of Dubai. You have World Bank helping to fight starvation in countries like Madagascar. Very large multinationals such as Pfizer is using it internally to remodel their business. Thanks to Imran for sharing a very interesting video with me, I realized how well PepsiCo is using the entire concept to do their own transformation. Unilever is not just using it internally for their own remodeling, they're actually using it for the good and the benefit of societies around the world. Then you come down to smaller startups, companies like New Matter, which is a startup, is actually using this methodology to make rapid time to market for themselves. And pretty much everybody, you are talking about NGOs, charity organizations. There's a company that's called Instex, which is a European financial firm helping the less advantaged countries with their financial technologies to be able to facilitate their financial services. And moving on to the next slide is when we come to know when you'll be able to actually use and implement the HCD. Hi, Back Tower. It's nice to
Hi, how are
meet
you?
you. Very well. It's nice to meet you.
Hi, ma'am. We'll just listen to this session and then we'll discuss at the end of the session as well. Intention and then
To use HCD is used whenever there is a need. Given the world population these days, uh, uh, there's always a need out there. And when we talk about needs, our minds automatically go to the people who are less advantaged than us. These people live in certain conditions that sometimes they don't even realize what they are lacking in order to, in fact, be able to just survive. And that's why the requirements should always remain at the top and priority of everything else for us, and we should always try to come up with the new methods to be able to set them forward and help them as much as we can as we go along. But the type of needs that we're talking about at this stage, it's much broader than that, because technology is advancing in a rapid way on a daily basis, and the level of literacy has to keep up with it. So that's why we should continuously meet the needs of the people, so that they'll be able to constantly keep up with the technology, so that they'll be able to know exactly how they'll be able to implement the technology. And all that's required is the communication to be initiated, and ideas automatically will be sparked. I'm pretty sure you're familiar with one phrase out there which says creativity never dries out. The more you use creativity, the more it comes to you. And this is pretty much all that HCD needs. All that's required is just people with lots of imagination and just commitment from your team. And we can just move on to the next slide. This is exactly the requirement, and that's all the requirements of the HCD for it to provide you with the frameworks and the methodologies that you require to not only be able to serve the audience that you have in mind, but to also be able to actively get them engaged within the whole process while you are running your project. And by doing so, not only you will achieve your goals, you'll actually be able to reach the durability as well as the sustainability of that you actually have in mind. We can move on to the next slide. So by now you already know exactly what you have as a center stage of your projects going forward, and you should know that if you want to in fact improve your investments over the long term, HCD suggests that you move through three main phases within the project. The first phase starts with the inspiration phase, which is when your team comes together and then they realize the types of resources and the tools that they have to utilize, which will take them into the ideation phase, and they'll take the information gathered and use those as their opportunities for designing, which will be followed by the implementation phase, where they'll actually take the designs and then start to get more realistic with the concept. So now we can get started on the next slide with the actual phases. Now, there are 2 points that I would like to mention at this stage before getting started. Is that these processes that I'm introducing are not the only ones out there. There are a couple of more. In fact, there could be so many more. And that's the beauty of HCD. It's really, really, really flexible. And this is only the order that I have found to be useful for maybe myself and a couple of other people. But what I suggest is for you to go out there and do your own research and find your own mix and match. If you don't think this order works for you, so you can find maybe your own order just try to follow your own method and be as flexible as you can with this process, because as you start to implement it, you see exactly how flexible HCD is. And the other thing is, because we're going to have a nice chat conversation at the end of this presentation, hopefully, as we're going along through this presentation, I would like to ask you to start taking down notes and some with any questions that comes to your mind, so that later on we'll be able to discuss them later. So starting with the inspiration phase, this is the phase where your team realizes the types of resources and the tools that they have in hand, and then they set out and go have their discoveries. They start to bond together and start to get to do their learning. Um, but let's move to the next slide. Normally, when they start at the beginning of the project, people usually think about starting to set out a goal. I think that before setting out the goal, usually it's a good chance for people to. We can move to the next slide, Imran. It's a good chance for, at the very beginning, it's a good chance for people to know what your challenges are, because this will allow you to perhaps realize the types of opportunities you might have that you had not known before, and it will also give you some level of organization. There's one method for you to come up with the framework for your challenges. The diagram on the right might look like a multi-stepper, but we'll just go through it right now. So think about what it is that you want to reach to, and then put it in a very, very basic question format for yourself. And then think about, like, let's say, the type of impact you want to make and the solutions you want to reach to, and refine that question for yourself. If you're still not happy, go back to the initial question, and then just take the steps again for yourself, and just keep on repeating this loop until you're happy with the challenge definition that you have come up with. Moving on to the next slide. At this stage, it's a good chance for you to start to get to know your audience through interviewing them. And of course, the best way to interview your audience is by going out and actually getting to meet them. Because a lot of the times, while your audience is interacting with, let's say, your solution, sometimes they don't even realize the types of requirements they have. So it's nice to sit there and actually watch them as they are interacting with your solution, and just be open. Don't try to make any assumptions. Just sit there and listen to them, and just be an open observer. Ask open-end questions and validate back whatever they tell you. If you're not sure of the questions that you want to ask them, there is one method with the diagram that's on the right. This method is called desire outcome statement. Nothing complicated as it looks in the diagram. It's actually much simpler than that. So what you do is, let's say you have a certain audience in mind. You just take a smaller sample size of that audience, and run by two options of your solution by them. And let's say a certain percentage has chosen one over the other one. This will give you a nicely quantified answer over the preferred option. And based on this answer, you'll be able to come up with some accurate questions, which will give you the confidence. With these accurate questions, you'll have more confidence to actually go out and do these interviews. We can move to the next slide. And while you're doing the interviews, it's also important to realize what are the resource flow of your users. We're talking about what is inflow and outflow of your audience. And by that, we're not necessarily talking about currency, it could be in any form. However, it's important to know what it actually costs them. The type of questions you'll be able to ask is, for example, which resources have the highest cost, what is the most valuable asset to them, what is the frequency of this inflow and outflow, or maybe if they are done in bulks or they're done incrementally, or in fact if the inflow is dependent on the cash flow of another industry. Like, let's say if you're interviewing retailers of tea, they might be dependent on tea leaf wholesalers or farmers of tea leaves. So it will be important for you to know this information. And moving on to the next slide, now that you have a good idea of your audience, it's important to be able to define their type of personality as well as the type of tasks they perform by creating things called personas. And the way to make this definition is by figuring out things like their attributes. So that will be like what do they do in real life, how comfortable are they with the level of technology, what are their goals and intentions of using your product. Very importantly, what needs and requirements do they have in order to switch or start using your product. And there are two ways to come up with these personas. So one way is for you to actually sit down with your team and write these on pieces of cards, which is a very easy thing to do. Usually you'll come up with too many personas, and then you just put them together on a wall next to each other. Of course, you're gonna later on at a later stage, maybe you'll probably have to cut them down because you've come up with so many of them. And another method is called the data-driven persona, which is an accurate one because it's based on facts. And you'll be able to, of course, present it and share it with a wider audience. And of course, with the data-driven personas, as also mentioned on this slide, you have more resources at hand than just the field visits. We'll be able to move on to the next slide. So now that you have a good idea of what it is you're challenging and you know very well what your audience is, and you have a nice definition of that, this will be a good chance for you to actually start setting out your goals and do a preliminary project plan for yourself. And we suggest that when you do a project plan, the plan has to be something we call SMART. So what do we mean by SMART? It means that the guidelines you set for yourself need to be clear and direct. Your results need to be quantifiable and trackable. The budgets and resources have to be realistic. You need to remain focused on your end goals. And of course, those goals that you set for yourself have to be achievable within the timeline. A couple of other pointers for your plan is just to make sure that you keep a track of your documentation and just realize the type of issues you have during the process. At this stage, keep financials to very basics, like only cost and income analysis. and keep a checklist of your deliverables and outcomes, and keep running, checking on them from time to time. And then try to plan for a few basic things, like for example maybe the space you require, the types of and the number of trips you'll probably have to make, or perhaps the staff and the skills that you'll need. We'll be able to move on to the next slide, which is a project and a case study which used one of the methodologies within the inspiration phase, and that will be in the next slide. So Room started as a basic campaign in the United States to help raise awareness to mothers um, around the importance of reading to their children, and how important it is in their early childhood development. But they use the interview technique to interview not just mothers, but also child development experts as well as pediatrician. And they were so successful that not only they got the mothers on board, but also the communities around them, and they became volunteers of the entire campaign. And it actually went beyond that into becoming an application which is serving 1,500,000 families within the United States, and it's also gone ever since 2014. It's gone even beyond the United States. It's actually gone internationally to 5 other countries as well. So now with the next slide, we'll move to the next phase of designing, which is the ideation phase in the next slide. Now, the ideation phase is the most design intensive phase, and it's the phase that requires the highest amount of teamwork, because now you've received the data, so you actually have to come to the studio and start to analyze on it. With these 4 processes that you see over here, we're also introducing other sub-processes, so we'll be able to give you a better understanding of the overall concept. So let's move to the next slide, and let's get started with brainstorming, which is one of my favorites, because by now you have discovered the pain points of your users, and this has given you, and it has brought lots of ideas to you. So the beauty of brainstorming is that it has no limits. You can just take your ideas and just start branching out, and go to as many directions as you want to at the beginning, and just keep on exploring all the ideas you have. And once you think you have branched out enough, then you can go back to the initial ideas, see which ones you would like to elaborate on, and build upon those initial ideas. If you're conducting this exercise as a team, you can put these ideas as well as the stories you've gathered on pieces of sticky notes, and then put them next to each other on a wall and discuss it among the team. Out of all of them, you can come up with 5 themes, and then turn each of those themes into an insight statement. If you're running this exercise as an individual, you can just go through the entire process as an individual and come up with your own theme. Or what you can do is you can create just a quick prototype, run it by someone who is an expert in the field, or then run it by your team and receive their feedback, and that will actually show you exactly the direction that you need to go, and you'll be able to assess the requirements. So we'll move on to the next slide, and by now you can see that the ideas that you've had are starting to show you a little bit of patterns that are emerging, and this is a good chance for you to start to put them in some kind of a framework. Again, we're not talking about anything complicated. So initially, as soon as you see those patterns, start with something as simple as like a flowchart. And then later on, you'll be able to build up on those frameworks. Three of them I'm suggesting over here. One of them, a very famous one that I use myself quite frequently, is called the journey map. Most probably a lot of you have already heard about it as well. The beauty of journey map is that it takes uh, the moments of interaction that the user has, and then it connects it with the touch points in a very flowy and story-like manner, so that it actually makes it easy and connects them in a nice, easy way to understand. Another method is called the relational map, which is more organic. So you can put these patterns and ideas on separate cards, and then you take the central idea, put it in the middle, and then all the other ideas around it, and then link the central idea to all the other ones. The third framework will be in the next slide, which is called a 2x2 framework. Very common one. So what you'll do is you'll be able to compare your items across two different axes. Let's say according to their behavior, and then according to the social status, and then you place those items on the different quadrants that they fall in under. If you have, like, let's say one specific user that you're targeting, so you locate the user as to which quarter they have fallen under, and then based on that positioning, that will determine the course of your action going forward. And this will actually bring you to the stage of starting to get a little bit more practical, and just come out of the paper and planning stage. So the next slide will show you exactly how to start to get more practical through rapid prototyping. But still, we're not talking about anything too elaborate. Prototypes as well also have to remain as low cost and as basic as possible, because all you want to do is just to realize the workability of your idea. And the entire exercise is about you building the interaction with your team, and then building the interaction between your team and the user. And just make sure that everything you build is just easy to rearrange, and continuously you'll be able to receive the feedback that you require from the user. In case you have used the journey map framework, this is another good chance to be able to use the journey map. So what you'll be able to do is you'll be able to take out the key moments of the journey map and use those as concepts in order to be able to elaborate on those concepts. If you're running the prototyping session as a team, what you'll be able to use is a method called build and run activity, which is something that the team can put up a board and then split it in half. So on the top part, they'll write down the goals that they want to achieve. And then on the bottom part, as they are building the prototype, they will be able to note down the learnings that they are having during the entire exercise. But overall, at the end of the day, just continue to receiving feedback and just continue to iterate in order to improve your prototype. And during the entire thing, we just keep on talking about feedback. So I cannot stress the importance of this. And that's why in the next slide, which is following this one, I'm going to introduce the four different ways you'll be able to receive feedback in the next slide. Imran, we can move to the next slide. Thank you. So there could be even more of them out there, but these are the four famous ones. So for example, there is a group interview session, which is just a group of like-minded people which you can put together, and these people just bring up the subject among them so that they'll be able to discuss it and come up with their own ideas and conclusions together. Or what you can do is you can run a more formal session with someone who is an expert in the field and get their insights on the entire context as well as the history. And the third one is just, let's say you end up in just a group that you're sitting with with a group of people, and you can casually bring up the conversation with them and just see where the conversation takes you. And see what other people have to say about it. The fourth one, importantly, is actually encouraging and involving the users themselves in the conversation itself. But the entire ideation phase at the end of the day is all about your own learning. So make sure any feedback you receive is as honest as possible. So now we can move on to the next slide, which is another very important methodology, and that is the storyboarding. I would like to think the storyboard is a build-up on the journey map, even though some people disagree. But it's a little bit closer to that because it has to do a lot with the interaction and behavior of the user, and it becomes very significant because it gets more visualized, so it helps in that manner. The other very significant parts of the storyboard is that it allows you to see exactly where the issues are. You'll be able to eliminate your errors. You can even see if your design is even workable. You'll be able to predict the behavior of your users, and hopefully, possibly, you'll be able to prevent rework down the line. And of course, the visualization aspect of storyboards help you to discover exactly what the essentials of the entire process are. So that's why, as you are receiving suggestions in the areas of improvement from the user, it's actually very important to continue to illustrate. And illustrations, we just mean sketches, nothing too complicated, but it's very important to illustrate the experiences in as in-depth as possible. So now I'll just give you another case study, which is related to the ideation phase. And this is one case study which again used one of these processes in a very nice manner. The Clean team has had the support of both public sector as well as the government sector to help the people in the most remote areas of Ghana have access to sanitation system. And they, even though their prototyping phase was very intense over 7 weeks, but they did such a good job in designing the aesthetics as well as the technicals and designing the logistics that they even changed the mindset of these villagers. I'm pretty sure you can imagine how difficult it is to change the mindsets of such people. So ever since then, they've actually been able to recruit and maintain all 40 of their servicemen, and they've been able to rent out up to 600 toilets to people living in those areas and living in those conditions. And that will bring us to the final phase of HCD, being the implementation phase. This is the phase where your team goes out of the studio back to the environment, starts to have more interaction, not just with the end users, but also with their stakeholders as well as the investors. And this is the time for you to start and think more strategically for yourself, because you're gonna start and plan and be a lot more flexible with your business model. So moving to the next slide, and given the fact that you already have experience with prototyping, now you're going to get a little bit more serious with live prototyping, because you'll need to discover the actual viability and feasibility of your end solution. And for this reason, you're going to have a lot more interaction with your end user to be able to be able to get much closer to your end solution. And that's why it's important for you to figure out things like the logistics of your team, and be able to know exactly how you'll be able to do your demonstrations. It's also just like rapid prototypes, it's still important for you to try to do multiple live prototypings, because this will give you more chances to do further iterations, and this in turn of course gives you gets you closer and closer to your final solution and the final offering that you want to make. And of course, in parallel to live prototyping, just as important as that, in the next slide, we can see the importance of creating the roadmap for yourself. Roadmap is consistent of setting out your timeline as well as figuring out what are the action plan of the project. This is very important specifically for your stakeholders, because they want to know how you are figuring out your time frame, as well as how the team is going to set out their responsibilities throughout the entire project for yourselves. So what's suggested for you to do is, normally you can set out the timeline to be over 12 to 18 months, and then break these into single months, break them down into single months for yourself, so that you'll be able to set the milestones for each and every one of those months. And that will actually give you the good chance to actually assign each milestone to the tasks of each team member. Of course, every plan and every business model has to have a funding strategy. So in the next slide, we'll see that if you want to have a session to come up with a funding strategy, and if you want to be able to brainstorm the funding strategy, it's important to include the entire team, the design team, and not just the stakeholders. and you still don't need to think long term. It's all right to think medium to short term for the time being. The types of things you can discuss during the session are, let's say, the type of funding that you might require, as well as the relationships that you'll have to build up for yourself and nurture. If you are going to deal with, and if you're going to produce a physical product, at this stage you'll need to figure out exactly how many of them you'll need to produce to be able to sell initially. And then a couple of other things that you'll probably have to figure out is, like, let's say, your break even point, or maybe at which state you'll have to start to move from your short term to more long term, more sustainable goals. And of course, you want to make sure, we can move to the next slide. You want to make sure that you are having the actual impact, and you are making the actual change in the community behavior, and your service that you're offering is actually going to increase the level of adoption. And that can only be done through constant monitoring and evaluating. If you're doing this, don't be shy to ask the help of your stakeholders. They're always around to help you out, and you'll always be able to use their support. If the monitoring and evaluation is not feasible for you internally, you can always outsource it. But even if you want to conduct this internally for yourself, don't overcomplicate it with too many formulas. You can just stick to very simple things, like, for example, number of site visits to your website, or your sales numbers. And the other thing is, the business environment out there is constantly changing. So you have to be comfortable with the fact that your business model, just like the prototyping, will require multiple iterations. So just pay attention and be flexible with it. And just know the fact that from time to time you're going to need to update your business model as well. And yes, your project will start, and we can move to the next slide. Your project will start, and your team will be successful, but this success, it's up to you to define and measure it for yourself. And generally, there are four indicators and criteria for you to run and measure this success for your team, which are the common ones. Like, for example, if you are sticking to the time frame you have set for yourself, if you are sticking to the budget that you've set for yourself, if you are meeting or perhaps even exceeding the requirements of the features and of the deliverables, and if you are efficiently making use of your resources and staying up to the quality standards. However, experts in the field are telling us that it's very important that we don't stay at that level of criteria. There is a deeper level that we'll be able to measure in order to come up with the ultimate success. But right now, I'm not going to bore you with all 5 of them. I'm just going to skim through them. Those indicators are project, business, strategic, process, as well as deliverable success. Out of all 5, which the process success is the most important one, because they say it's the fundamental one, and if you focus on this, that will actually set the foundations of improvement for all the rest of them. And then, by giving you another example of a case study which successfully used one of the methodologies in the implementation phase, I'm going to conclude the implementation. So, Voices for Birth Justice was again another campaign for mothers, but this was initially a print campaign to help raise awareness around the dangers of preterm birth. Um, However, the team was very successful in coming up with a roadmap of not just those print campaigns, but when they set out the milestones, they actually put the milestones of how they'll actually be able to utilize digital media as well. So they put the milestones, for example, on when to launch the website, when to host the public launch events, and when and actually how to use the social media. So not only their print posters went on public transport, they actually in 2014 had a very successful launch on their website, and they've also been quite active on social media as well, which has gained them quite a nice traction. Thank you so much. Thank you for this chance, and I'm just going to leave the floor open for the questions and a nice chat conversation we're gonna have.
Thank you very
Thank you
much,
very much,
Mariam.
Maryam.
It was a
It was
great
a great
session.
session.
I hope
I hope
the
the
startup
startup
there is
there
an
is an
I hope startup आपने enjoy किया होगा. Human centric design is very important for your startup journey, especially आप जब social problem solve कर रहे होंगे, ऐसे problems जो कि society के अंदर existing like water, sanitation, healthcare, education. तो उन problems के लिए HCD human centric design is very important. Thank you very much, Mariam, for a very detailed session. I really wonder how many startups would be able to implement this level of HCD at right now. But definitely, this helps them. This playbook would stay with them, and they can definitely use this as they progress on their journey for building impactful startups. More than questions, we have very warm messages for you that
that
you will.
you will.
Sorry, could you repeat that once again?
Oh,
Oh,
great.
great.
So Mariam
So
will
Maryam
send
will
you
send
all
you
of us.
follow-up.
We're
We're
already over
already
that.
over that.
That would be great.
Thank you very
Thank you
much
very
once
much
again.
once again.
Sure, it was my pleasure.
Thank you very much, Mariam. It was a great session. We appreciate your time and contribution. Sibga is saying that thank you, explained almost everything.
Thank you so much.
So your final comments and your concluding remarks, anything. If you want to have any message, please share. Mariam, over to you.
Maryam, over to you.
Um, Again, what I would suggest, actually, I do have at the end of this presentation a few other things to share with everyone. Um, so, what I have done is I have come up with a template for the persona, uh, which everybody will be able to use. So, maybe this can be shared with the audience at a later stage. So there's a persona template in this presentation, and I have also shared a couple of resources that I have found, um, um, some books as well as some electronic books as well in form of resources. So hopefully these will come in handy in case anyone needs some further information or exercise.
Yes, Mariam.
Yes, Maryam.
We are we have already shared this lecture slides with all the participants, and we are sharing your contact information as well. If someone wants to reach out to you directly, we'll encourage them to send their questions as well.
That will be great.
Thank you very much, Mariam, for joining us from all the way from Dubai. We hope and pray that you also get some rain this season as well. Pakistan is lucky enough to have a good rainfall season, as you mentioned earlier.
Yes, that actually made me quite jealous. Being in Dubai in the middle of the summer is not really a favorite thing of mine. It's wonderful for you for me to know that Pakistan is having such a nice and mild summer. I would love
Yes, please.
I would love to visit Pakistan very soon.
That's great, Mariam. Really, you're more than welcome to Pakistan any day. Islamabad is a beautiful city, one of the most beautiful capitals in the world. You're more than welcome. Pakistan is second home. Being Persian, being Iranian, you're our neighbors. You're more than welcome any day.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I'm pretty sure there's plenty to see. I've heard so much.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Mariam. Have a good day. And that's it, guys, for HCD session for today. And we'll be restarting our design thinking journey tomorrow. And we really want you to become design thinking experts, at HCD experts, and produce some of the best innovations in Pakistan. Thank you very much. Have a good day. Thank you, Mariam.